Anu, are you scared? Yes, I am Manu. Aren't you? When did I hear all that? Anyway, what does time matter? Fear is taller. Seconds, days, months, even years are short. Anu, I wish to be tall. Manu, I wish to be very tall too. History stopped the other day. Now we are insects. Let us become invisible, Anu. But we are invisible, aren't we, Manu? Come to think of it, when there is no history, we become short, so invisible. Someday we will be tall again, Anu. I hope so. Let us wait, Manu.
There are certain things that happen in life which when you are in the receiving end you don't like, but you find that in the long run that can bring you to understanding of things which you never would have thought of otherwise. The very fact that I had the experience of knowing what caste discrimination is today the greatest advantage I have in understanding South Asia society. The very fact that my name was under a disappearance list without any cause, that helped me to understand lot of innocent people lives were destroyed. Some people think very fact that somebody got disappeared means that they have done something wrong. Had I not this experience, I would have also been a skeptic, because how do we know what we know is true? And this is a perennial philosophical problem. All philosophies have struggled with this whole idea. How do you know what you know is true? But when somebody knows something by experience, then you know and you can say, I don't believe I know. You know, this tree, this was planted when my younger sister was born. My father brought the plant and planted it. It flowered in a few years. That's the month she died. She suffered from pneumonia, and then a doctor, a native doctor, made a fatal mistake of giving a wrong kind of treatment. On that day, there was flowers in this tree. There's flowers always. This was the house I was living before I left in 1989. It was a peaceful village. Around this canal, up to the river, the people who lived were from the washerman's caste. Just the other corner, near the sea, is a fisherman who lived, and they also belong to a different caste. They are all considered low caste. There are some people who considered that they were from a upper caste. And then there is a age from 6 or 7, you are chosen for what is called the confirmation. You know, the bishop comes and then you have this confirmation. So, in the confirmation at the end there is a Thanksgiving speech. So, the teacher of the class, who was outsider, so he chose me to give the Thanksgiving speech. So, I was with my father, big assembly waiting, and then the events take place, different people are called, and we waited till the end. My name was never called. Then of course, my father and they understood. that this is the way, saying that the fellow from that caste cannot be allowed to to give the Thanksgiving speech to the bishop. So, that has a shocking effect for a young person. When a child is growing up, he is made to believe that he is from a inferior caste, that he is not equal to the others. All throughout the country, the villages were divided either as one caste, only one caste people live in that village, or separate caste living separately. So, you do not visit their houses, you are not invited, at the same time you do not invite them. There is no law about it, but that is how the society function. Principle of segregation, nobody can ignore this. This house is the mother house of a very great order called De La Salle brothers. They, I think, came here about 150 years back, and their main task was the education of the poor.
And you got some lessons of social service from here?
Yeah, it's the lessons of dedication, commitment, idea of selflessness, idea of service to the poor. The commitment has to be in the world, and that was my choice very early in life. One time I thought of being a religious brother devoting for education. As I went through all the trainings and discussions and all this, more and more I began to see there is something wrong here. And then at the first reaction is, well, how can you be right and such a great thing can't be wrong? So, you want to conform. I must have been 18 or 19. I really sat down and confronted some of the issues and made some decisions that I must depart from this path. There is something inhumane in some of the things that happens. For example, as young people in the order that I went, there were 3 vows. The vows were that you will be poor, you will accept obedience, and that you will be be chaste, that means you will not marry. Now, for me the first one was no problem, and being poor, and that is something that I really internally like that idea of not having anything more than what you need. But I more and more began to question the idea of obedience. This whole idea of obedience being raised to a very high virtue, I think, is one of the very false notions which developed, particularly the Catholic theological circles. It was same with this whole issue of celibacy, that a person could choose to be chaste on his own, I can understand, but to make it a condition, it can be great cruelty. I made up my mind, I came out. That was a very big decision, for a young person who had decided that you choose this path, and ever since I have never regretted. I joined the university, that is the Colombo University, the Faculty of Law, in 1967 and graduated in 1972. For me, coming with a lot of curiosity, with the big hopes that the university will open you up to new avenues about understanding things, law faculty was a big disappointment. I did not see an intellectual life in that place, just a very formal teaching, No, it was not an exciting place of any kind of discussion. The kind of vibrant intellectual life of a university has never been seen in these premises. The idea of law was that is already there. Now let us teach them. It never occurred to them. Look at the place where law is practiced, courts, the police, the Attorney General's department, and develop a critique of that law compared to the law that been taught, and ask questions about this difference that never occurred to them. Now things are worse than before. There is fear of critically minded student who may become a troublemaker. On the day of April 5th, 1971, when the insurrection was declared, the universities were closed down. Of course, my family was a very protective family. When they knew that there is an emergency, so my father will not allow us to get out of the house. I had no idea of what was happening, but the real shock for us was the days that followed. We heard all kinds of stories of people being killed. Within few days, the bodies began to float in this canal. This happened in 1971. This happened also between 1987 and 1991. If the river can talk, they will tell a very powerful story of cruelty, the violence that is mainly exercised by the state, and this happened in every part of the country. Most of these are people who are arrested and thereafter killed. And a lot of torture. For the first time, the idea of torture entered in our mind in a big way was hearing the stories, where the nails have been pulled, all kinds of things in order to get more names. The sole idea of the inquiries was to get more names, and then beginning to question for the first time, what the hell am I learning? We are supposed to be learning the law, and then we thought that with that law, when we go to the court, everything will be fine, and suddenly you find this kind of things happening. Then for the first time you question, is it worth learning this? Is there a real purpose of being a lawyer? I was the first to graduate from this village, but now you will get many. So today is a sophisticated group of people living in a semi-urban setup. Life has changed, but psychology has not changed. In the psychology, still people don't dare to challenge authority, even when the authority behaves wrong, for example, like killing people. So that fear psychology was written into this village. External side of the caste has disappeared. I think even the inner side is slowly eroding, but that explains the country. Heart of the caste idea is disproportionate punishment. So if you go against your caste rule, then you will be punished, then your family will be punished, and your clan will be punished. You will lose your property. And I think the issue of justice is very much related to this, because in such a society there is no concept of common justice. You can never build an idea of solidarity if you believe that people are segregated like this.
We are the anonymous people. No photos, no paintings to record our past. Our forefathers collected no stamps. No public wall bears our name. No memories of us in public games. We are the anonymous people. Our forefathers were the same. Ages suffering connects us to past. No memories of us, but our world is vast. We are the anonymous people. Silence is our mask.
In India, this fight against this inequality and injustice started from the very early days of Buddhism. Buddha was the first revolutionary who questioned this system of injustice, the caste system. Here, the major religion, the ruling powerful religion is Buddhism. But here, the Buddhism of Sri Lanka doesn't address such issues.
Yeah.
And to my knowledge, the Buddhism of Sri Lanka is preserving, protecting all kinds of injustices in society.
Yeah. So, this is where you see the basic heart of Buddhism is taken away. Even now, nobody open their mouth against the police torture. Nobody open their mouth regarding extrajudicial killings. No challenge to the authority. Asking authority to be just, that is not there. Only thing is, what they ask is respect our privileges. Spiritually, there is a huge crisis and denial of what Buddhism is here. The social meaning is lost. So, there is nothing in this country bring people together on a social meaning, and there would have been nothing better than Buddhism to do that, if Buddhism was practiced in the way it was meant. By the time I came to practice law back in 1980, I had already a very good idea of what is happening in the country. What I learned practically in terms of cases thereafter was merely a confirmation of what already it was in my mind. There is something really radically wrong in this whole so-called system. The idea of justice, that atmosphere was not in the court. Several magistrates we practice under, I do not remember any of them as any kind of people with a big thirst for law or knowledge or truth or justice. For example, now when we entered into doing cases, large numbers of cases, we found many of them had nothing to do with any crime, but they were poor. So, you need a substitute for crimes when your system cannot really pursue criminals and catch them, because you have to keep statistics, you have to give reports. So, you have to show that crimes have been solved. How do you do that? You get hold of some poor people, beat them up and get a confession that they did it, and then produce the report in the court, and then keep them for a long time in without bail, and very often that is the end. That is what we experience throughout one case after the other, in thousands of cases. This is the discovery of Sri Lanka as it exists today, and that is what an average Sri Lankan will discover in his lifetime. And then what kind of mentality comes out of it? So, the legal system has collapsed. Expecting things to happen through the law is not there, and that is what the entire idea of human rights as it is in the UN conventions is based on a functioning legal system. You have the right to life. What does that mean? That nobody can take your life arbitrarily. What will happen if they are taken arbitrary? The court will intervene on your behalf and stop him, and you will be protected. That is the idea.
In a day in July 1983, when our nation had gone mad, I visited you. The sea was calm behind your house. You greeted me as before, but something had gone wrong, we both knew. Measured silence we kept. You were the master, I was the child. We had played that game before, but that day it stopped. Our cheerful beliefs shattered. We saw the unknown unfolding, fate's smiling trend, and gods mocking. The sea was calm behind your house. Whenever I see a calm portion of the sea, I remember your poem. The sea was calm behind your home. Now the
Yeah.
sea is calm behind Basil Fernando.
Yeah.
Wow.
See, the poem was written as a conversation between a senior guru for whom the pupil has a big respect, and he visits him at the time of enormous turmoil in the country. That is the time when the 1983 riots, when the houses of the Tamils were burned and things like that. So he visits the guru, and then the poem virtually says, all this time you were guru and I was the pupil. But today that game we cannot play anymore. The city has gone mad, and what was happening, the violence that is taking place. But yet, just behind your house, the sea is calm. So inside that house, there was no tension, despite of the country being in tension. It is same culture. You know, the desire to talk about poetry or literature or humanity, all this. Real culture. Culture you can see in the life. That sea, calmness of that sea, calmness that come from spirituality, calmness that come from culture, that was there in the house.
In Sri Lanka, most dangerous times have been when a feeling is created, too much of ordinary way of life has been disturbed. Now, that gives a kind of a license for the government to give orders through emergency regulations to go beyond whatever the law will ever permit. So, they are developed this habit of death lists, a gathering of the names of people whom they thought should be got rid of. Sometimes it can be petty jealousy. There was no checking. Any kind of information was the final information. So, you have a list of people to be eliminated, and you have a group of people who are assigned for that, and this became a sophisticated exercise.
The placard here shows that on this ground stand the monument of the disappeared. This idea of the monument was, reaction to at least about 30,000 disappearances which took place in the south at the time between 1987 and 1991. Our idea was to get it to be remembered. But even up to now, there had not been any justice given to any of these persons, or later with large number of people who disappeared in the north and the east. One mother, she lost her son. His body was taken on a helicopter, dropped in the sea with the hope that it will sink. But the sea brought the body to the shore, and somebody identified, and she came and she made that remarkable statement, "I am a lucky mother, because the waves have brought my son back to me. Now I can bury him." The need for a family to at least to be able to bury, that is the most elementary element of decency.
This wreath with no name attached is for you who have no grave. As the place of earth which embrace you could not be found, this wreath was placed by the wayside. Forgive me for placing a memorial for you by the roadside.
Here is an example, Sri Lankan example of killing the innocent. Who these individuals were didn't matter. We need to kill some people and exhibit their bodies so that others will get afraid. I get a call from my friend and the client saying that, there is something I want to communicate. Can you come and see me? I had already a sense, number of people told me, Basil, it is not very safe for you. Because, they knew that I was involved in the human rights work. I was a bit outspoken. Many policemen were not very happy with me. And when I met, he said, our friend, he was referring to the chief of the terrorist unit, our friend wanted me to tell you that you are not safe. If they arrest, it means that you will disappear. Then I knew it's a game with time. So I took a ticket immediately, and within about 3 days most, I left Sri Lanka. My wife was expecting our only child, so it was a very important time for the family, and also my father was getting old. So that was not a time that I would ever wanted to have leave the country. Whenever I used to go for some meetings, even then for abroad, India or Hong Kong, my father was never happy. But on this particular occasion, when I told him I am going for a short time, he put up a huge smile and said, go. He was himself aware of what was going on. So next morning we left. Later I got to know that we were being followed. Some 4 people have been sent armed, but on the way they had the tire puncture on the road, so they could not follow us. Then stealing of people happen often. I too was told I was included in a list. I knew an escape route and took it. 25 years later, I am still alive. But Wilbert, the native doctor, who was also warned, knew no such route. He came out after a few days in hiding. They took him, his family sought him for years, till his wife was insane. Now no one knows where they are. Sadly, no one talks about them anymore. At the time I came to Hong Kong, there was a 3 months visa on arrival. Now, after 3 months, what do you do? That was the only problem, and I was getting a lot of messages from Sri Lanka, don't come back. People were telling me that, if you love us, please don't come back because it's very dangerous. During that time, my friend John Clancy and another friend, they have told some UNHCR person that there is a Sri Lankan lawyer looking for some work. There was a big project of UNHCR here on Vietnamese refugees. And the first thing they asked was, when can you start work? So within few days I started working, and there was a team of lawyers who will go daily to the Vietnamese camps, and there were camps spread around Hong Kong. It was their job to go through the appeal and see whether there is a ground to be recognized under the Refugee Convention, and whether somebody could be considered as persecuted. So therefore, we need protection. Within that about 2.5 years, I have interviewed at least about 1,000 Vietnamese. As a young man growing in Asia, we have always been very supportive of Vietnamese in their struggle during the Vietnamese War. So we used to think about Vietnamese as heroic people. Now in here, interviewing the refugees, I began to see the other side. the victory over Vietnamese was one thing, which is of course politically a important landmark, but the reality of the life of people was another. And I think that is also another distinction which I really began to make only after this experience. We study theories in the abstract, and then we study about all kinds of revolutions, which are very important historical events. But on the other hand, what does people go through, ordinary average man go through during these times? What happens to people? The people who fought for the revolution now are trying to flee to the very same country against which they were fighting.
When I left in 1989 September, I myself did not take it very emotionally. But actually the more difficult part was for my family, my wife. She was pregnant about 3 months, waiting for the only child. Then I got the news of the baby being born. So it was when she was 3 months and I was staying with a Chinese family. And then Jacinta, my wife, was ready to come with the child. Then this Chinese couple, because they knew that I can't go, they went to Sri Lanka and came back with my wife and the child, helping her to bring the child. For my wife it was a very difficult time, but somehow it was better than the other alternative. If something happened to me, I always remind my daughter, you would be just like many others who have faced that situation. That is why you should remember them. You know, you when you see them, just don't say that it's nothing to do with me. It could be me.
One thing about my father is I can almost never predict what he's going to say, because he looks at things very deeply and he thinks about them for a very long time. I remember I asked my dad whether I should study law in India, because I was looking at law schools and I thought maybe. And I remember he said it would be like going to a seminary, spending years there and then coming out and thinking God doesn't exist. In Hong Kong, sometimes because everything works, you can take it for granted, but I always have this voice in my head saying, what happens when all this breaks down? So you always value the functioning mundane.
It was during this period that I began to understand Hong Kong a little better. When you live in one particular country, you began to think that that is normal. The world must be like this everywhere. But then you are beginning to see the distinctions only when you are exposed to them. So I began to see for the first time a certain stability that has been brought about by law. The fact that people had no complaints about the judiciary, that basically judiciary is trusted. It's the same legal system. I have been trained as a lawyer in the common law. So here was another common law jurisdiction where it is working, basically working. I began to see that basic control of corruption is actually true, that the average person in Hong Kong does not pay bribes, and which is a very, very, very hugely different experience. For us, in everything of public life, you have simply to pay some bribe, otherwise it will never happen. So one of the friends who I got very friendly with was a Canadian lawyer, and he made a friendship with a very senior guy in the UNHCR, who was selected to make arrangements for the UN Transitional Authority for Cambodia, and they were making preparation for this big mission. That was the biggest mission of the UN up to then. They were to have about 25,000 UN staff of various sorts, military, police, civil servants, the human rights people and like that. So, I got this invitation whether I like to join that, very gladly accepted, and then within about 6 months went to Cambodia. For anybody who had access enough to know what was happening in the country, it is, I think, a kind of experience that you hardly ever come across anywhere in the world. It is as bad as it can be. First of all, the loss of life. Almost everybody you meet had lost one or more members of their families. Our work was to deal with the legal system. So, we went around to find what the legal system is like. On my own, I decided to go to the court and just to sit there and watch what is happening. The judge was informed and judge was very welcoming, because the UN was treated as the authority in the country during that time. We were part of the political system. So, I took down notes of one case. The case was about a boy who has supposed to have stolen some small thing some 7-8 years back. Ever since he has been in jail, and now the trial, it happened like this. The judge came, they will call one witness, and that lady who has lost anything, she said, I do not remember anything. I do not know whether this is this guy who took it or somebody else who took it, or like that, this was heard, and then there is no cross examination. There is no lawyer. At that time, Cambodia had no lawyers. Government will give one of its employees as a defender. Now, the defender's task is to ask for a mitigating sentence, not to see that the person is innocent or to release him, but to give some reasons why it should be mitigated. That is all his role. That guy said something, and thereafter the judge retired. In 10 minutes he came back, and he had a long big paper in his hand, and he started reading the judgment. The judgment was already written and sentenced this fellow for another 8 years. In the afternoon, I went to see the judge. Judge was happily waiting to be congratulated. Come, how did I do? So, when we explained to him that the procedure was wrong, and that in any case for some petty theft, giving another 8 years for fellow who have been 7 years, he was thoroughly upset. Idea was whether an individual who comes as before us as an accused is actually guilty or not, it does not matter. What is important is this individual is a medium through which we are going to teach a lesson to the society. An elementary level of judiciary was not present. I wrote down this whole case, and I presented this to the UN Transitional Authority leadership. So, I suggested that if you do human rights work in this country, first thing is let us try to study this legal system, and let us try to make our effort centered around reform of this legal process. Otherwise, we cannot achieve any change here. This thing was discussed for about 2-3 weeks among the leaders. Then finally, I was called and I was told that we can't get involved in this kind of problems, because our mandate does not give us to interfere with their legal or judicial system. About 2.5 years later, when the whole thing was assessed, some of my colleagues said that is where we made the mistake. When a system collapses, nothing of what we know as normal remain normal. There are no rules. Back of my mind was all the time was in Sri Lanka. What I have seen in terms of the collapse in the place and what can happen. And I began to see, if this goes on, this is where we will come. And this I predicted already in 1993. I told number of people, I told them we are going this way. No, it can never happen to us because we have parliamentary system, we have this and that. Nobody want to take seriously. But today we have come there, not to the same extent, but virtually the same basics. There are no rules. Nobody matters. The judges don't matter. The policeman, he doesn't matter. There's only ultimately politician can matter if they are powerful position. The rest doesn't matter. I am in rebellion against utilitarianism. I think the whole ideology of our time is based on utilitarian ideas. Something useful, something not useful. Modern man had been forced to conform to utilitarian rules, utilitarian values. I think what is opposed to utilitarianism is a solidarity. Solidarity on the one hand with human beings, but also with the nature, as a part of nature. This whole idea of individual as a unit, individual is a very important concept and it can be a very rich concept, but if it is just put as a unit, something separate, then it is artificial. We belong. I think this is where even socialism we saw in the past failed, because they also was another form of utilitarianism. If your social enemy is bad, kill him. It is just matter of no concern. You have to, that is what you have got to do. Now, that is a extreme form of a utilitarian thought process, and that in our lifetime we saw that happening. The massive scale of just sacrifice a human being just like you will sacrifice anything. It was when I was there that there was two people came from Hong Kong and asked me whether I am willing to come to take over the Asian Human Rights Commission. By then I had realized that there is no contribution I can really make to Cambodia, and that is how somewhere in November 1994 I came to Hong Kong. The main activity of the human rights organizations were to teach the UN conventions. So, what we said was, merely saying that these things are universal is not going to make any difference. What we have to ask is, why is it that in our countries we still are not practicing these human rights values? It is not enough to talk about concepts of human rights, you have to talk about implementation of human rights. And the implementation of human rights take place through the investigative work of the police, the prosecution work of departments of prosecution, and the judiciary. These should be brought to the focus. Then we realize that in order to prove that these values are not respected in the country, we have to do a lot of documentation. We have to collect lot of information and show this is what the police do, this is what various other branches do. And that is how we entered into the area of the documenting on torture. Torture is a cutting edge issue. If a country is able to run its criminal justice system without the use of torture, that is a developed system that can be defined that way. If they are unable to do their criminal justice except by the use of torture, then it is a bad system. And that, first of all, that has to be corrected if we want to go towards the improvement of human rights. Now, is torture widespread? Now, a lot of people had doubts. They said no, they, because people have these average views. See, the problem is that many people who get involved in the human rights work are from middle class, intellectuals, the academics, or somebody who has an interest. Those are the people who become vocal in the human rights field. But the problems of human rights are faced by ordinary people, and there is no linkage. If you do not build a linkage to the ordinary person's way of life, his problems, then we are talking of concepts, not realities.
In a land called injustice, in a place called city of fear, there was a court presided over by a man called Mr. Absurd. The court sergeant was Mr. Drunkard. The moodlier was Mr. Bribery. There were many clerks and peons who had no names. The litigants were the ordinary folk who thought they came to seek justice, about which they had no notion. Some thought it white, some thought it black, some as liquor, and others as bribery. In the appeal court, Mr. Absurd was held in high esteem. The wisdom of Messrs. D and B received the nation's applause. Summons were never written but issued. Fines were never paid but consumed. Mr. Absurd said he held the balance, holding onto the shoulders of Mr. Drunkard and Mr. Bribery.
Some of these things are very trivial things in the surface, but the consequence to the victim is not that simple. One case very recently, 6 police officers attacked a family. In the evening they came to do some business. Mistaken them to be somebody else, they started beating them. Among them was about a 14-year-old boy. Because of it, he got severely injured, and then everybody pleaded, please take the boy to hospital. They didn't take him to the hospital. Next day morning, parent came and pleaded, the same happened. Instead, they produced before a magistrate. Before the magistrate was also, they asked, please send him to hospital. Even the magistrate did not make that order. Then inside the prison, the next day morning, the boy died in the laps of his brother for nothing. Again, a terrible case was a case of rape of a 14-year-old girl, school girl, from a poor family of tea estate workers. One adult and one young fellow who has a van abduct this girl, rapes her, and leave her and go away. But this girl, despite of being 14, goes straight to the police station and complain, this is what happened to me. And the police, for some good reason, immediately comes with her, come to the road and identify the van and arrest these 2 fellows immediately. But that case, which again happened in 2003 or so, went on till 2016, 14 years for rape case. Now, who will stand up that long for a case? Fortunately for this girl, there was this human rights organizations backing her. That is the way the court deals with such a severe rape case. The worst case that we know is a man who was a cook. One day there was triple murder in his home area. The police tried to find who did that, they couldn't find anybody. So, they heard from somebody, some fellow called Gerald knows something about it. So, immediately they went and arrested the wife and got the wife to call this man to come home, and immediately arrested him. He was brought to the police station, hung on the beam and started beating with iron and wooden poles. So, the result was that he ended up with a kidney failure, and after 2 weeks of being unconscious, he recovered, and then on his complaints, a criminal case was filed against the police. The retaliation was the police came and killed this man. Still the torture case is going on even now. This happened in 2002. Out of about thousands of cases, I am just only choosing few cases to illustrate the absurdity of the system. There is no end to this kind of stories. None of this kind of beatings happen if you are from an affluent background. It is all what happens to the poor. Every individual human being, every person who suffer a humiliation, who become a victim of violence, is a small microcosm of a vastly arranged spectrums of social controls. So, this micro, looking at it, having patient enough to sit down and collect details and see this and then present it to others. Look, see, you are every day you look at this, but you do not see this. So, through the micro speak of the totality, the vastness of things, but in the immediate small events, small people, the tears of a person, the humiliation that a person suffers, a little victory, a little daring of a person, and in all that there is a huge wealth of what is around us, which we do not notice. So, this book contains 402 cases of torture victims. These are all cases that we did ourselves. These are not selected from newspapers or by hearsay or anything. These are our own responsibility to investigate, to know all the details, and we have worked on them for several years. And we did like this about 2000 cases. And more it revealed that our basic theory was correct, that the legal systems of these countries are so defective that they are not able to fulfill the obligations of protecting human rights. Now, over the years, when we look at what really happened in Sri Lanka, which came to that point, what we find is that the use of more and more use of emergency laws and national security laws replacing the ordinary laws of protection that is available was the shift that took place, bringing about that kind of huge violations. The pretext came often due to various kinds of insurgencies, and when you have insurgencies, the government can easily justify the use of the national security laws, increase the power of the military to intervene into things, increase the police powers of surveillance, police powers of arrest, detention, and interrogation outside the normal legal framework. All that is possible when there is unrest. Now, what we experienced in that period in Sri Lanka, the world is experienced today. After 9/11, this was universalized. Language is the same. The language of national security or the law, saying that first we are threatened. A little threat is enough for the state to create the idea of a generalized threat. It is very easy to evoke the feelings of fear. They will expand this concept as much as possible because that is to the advantage of people who are very powerful. Then they can do whatever they want. And in that, what is really happening is abandoning of the democratic framework, shifting into more and more, making it a sham, making virtually the democratic rights meaningless. Basic things we learn from Sri Lanka and Cambodia, with which the AHRC started this work, is today the universal language. We are living at a time where everything is under threat. Democracy is severely under threat. Where will it end? To end like Cambodia, you don't need a Pol Pot or that kind of political situation. You can do it with less, but the result is same. And that is what we are seeing. That struggle against torture is a struggle for fundamental human values. When we fight for some unknown person who has been tortured somewhere, we are not just doing some humanitarian work. We are defending the fundamental framework on which the human society can remain a decent society. That is what it comes. When the law is unimportant, ethics is unimportant, morality is unimportant, finally the values are unimportant. And then what? Then what remains of humanity?
I used to sing Kavi from Padyavali, Mahaveli, Kalani, Valavi, Kalu, Ganga, flowing from the butterfly hills. I heard songs also of Raktaram Putum and charming girls growing in the villages. Then I saw bodies floating in the rivers, rainwater mixed with blood flowing from the mountains, floating bodies eaten by Kabaragwas. Now I do not like to hear of Valavi, Kalani, Kalu. Mountains have lost mystery and attraction. In the eyes of the mothers, I see not tears but distrust. What am I ask myself. What is my motherland? I want to sing those same poems. To that, I can't bring myself.